The orbital sander kicked a fine cloud of oak dust into the evening air, catching the amber light of the setting sun like suspended gold. The vibration ran up my forearm, a steady, numbing rhythm that usually cleared the noise out of my head. Today, it wasn't working. The air was thick with the scent of cut timber and impending rain, pressing down on the neighborhood with a heavy, breathless humidity. I killed the power. The sudden silence that fell over my driveway was absolute, broken only by the sharp, irregular sound of a woman's unsteady footsteps on the concrete sidewalk beyond my property line. I wiped my hands on a shop rag and walked toward the boundary of my yard. 5 anchor facts locked into my vision instantly. Location: the low wooden slatted gate separating my driveway from the neighborhood sidewalk. Blocking: she was standing on the other side, her hands gripping the top of the cedar pickets, knuckles white while I stood facing her, my back to my own house. Wardrobe: her long, vivid red hair spilled over the shoulders of a thick, cream-colored cardigan, layered over a matching ribbed crop top that looked out of place in the cooling evening air. Mood: frayed, bordering on a quiet, desperate breakdown. Trigger: action. She was leaning heavily into the gate, swaying slightly, the distinct scent of cheap Merlot drifting across the wood. Aurora Evans. She had moved in next door 6 months ago, bringing a quiet sort of chaos with her, boxes left on the porch, a garden that grew wild, and a habit of sitting on her steps at 3 a.m. Right now, her dark eyes were glassy, tracking the movement of my hands as I tossed the rag over my shoulder. "They're taking it," she said, her voice a rough whisper. "The house. They're taking it." "Nobody is taking your house, Aurora," I said, my voice low, trying to project a steadying anchor into the erratic space she was occupying. She let out a harsh, broken laugh and leaned further over the gate. The wood groaned under the shift in weight. She looked up at me, her gaze dropping to my mouth, the alcohol blurring the usual sharp boundary she kept between us. Before I could read the shift in her posture, she leaned in, her eyes fluttering shut, aiming a clumsy, desperate kiss toward my jaw. I didn't step back. I brought my hands up, calloused palms catching her shoulders, holding her firmly in place. The physical contact was entirely functional, a transfer of stability. The tremor in her frame hit my hands, and I locked my elbows, keeping a safe distance between us. "Aurora," I spoke quietly, the single word acting as a wall. Her eyes snapped open, confusion clouding her expression before a deep flush of humiliation crawled up her neck. She tried to pull away, but I held her steady for 1 more second, just long enough to ensure she wasn't going to lose her balance on the uneven pavement. "I'm sorry," she breathed out, looking away, her voice cracking. I don't know what I'm doing." I released her shoulders slowly, dropping my hands to my sides, slipping them into the pockets of my canvas work pants to ensure they stayed put. "If you want, I'll make the first move," I said, my tone completely level. "But not when you're like this, and not because you're scared of a piece of paper." That stopped her. She blinked, the panic receding just a fraction, replaced by a tentative curiosity. I nodded toward the crumpled yellow envelope crushed in her left fist, the unmistakable stationery of the Oak Creek Homeowners Association. "Go sleep it off. Drink a glass of water. Tomorrow, you bring that letter to my porch, and we'll look at it." She looked at the letter, then back at me. The chaotic energy around her seemed to settle, blocked out by the simple, practical directive. She didn't say anything else. She just nodded, her grip on the cedar gate loosening, and turned back toward her own house. I stood there until her front door clicked shut, the sound final and metallic in the twilight. The next morning, the humidity had broken, leaving the air crisp and sharp. I was out on the porch at 6 a.m., measuring the pitch of my roof line for a gutter repair. The tape measure snapped back into its housing with a loud clack just as Aurora walked up my driveway. She was sober, pale, and carrying 2 ceramic mugs of black coffee. She didn't offer an apology for the night before, and I didn't ask for one. We operated better in the plain truth. She set a mug on the railing and placed the crumpled yellow letter beside it. I picked it up. The paper was stiff, formal. Mrs. Gable, the HOA president, had typed a 3-page citation. It listed violations for Aurora's front retaining wall, claiming it was structurally unsound, violating community aesthetic guidelines, and encroaching 3 inches onto the community easement. The fines were already totaling $2,000, with the threat of a lien if the wall wasn't demolished and rebuilt by a sanctioned contractor within 30 days. She cornered me by the mailboxes yesterday, Aurora said, her fingers twisting a plain silver ring on her right hand. Said if I didn't have the money, the board would initiate foreclosure proceedings on the fines alone. I don't have it, Jaxon. I freelance. $2,000 might as well be 20. I read the dimensions listed in the citation. The muscles in my jaw tightened. She's citing a 12-inch setback for a non-load-bearing decorative tier, I muttered, tracing the printed numbers with a calloused thumb. That code only applies to primary structural retention over 4 feet in height. Your wall is 28 inches. It's exempt under Section 4B of the Municipal Grading Ordinance. Aurora stared at me. Her coffee paused halfway to her mouth. What? It's nonsense, I said, folding the letter neatly. She's using the wrong building code to force a fine, and her measurement on the easement is based on the sidewalk edge, not the actual city survey pin, which is buried under the topsoil near your mailbox. How do you know that? Because I dig holes for a living. I took a sip of the coffee. It was bitter, exactly how I liked it. There's a community meeting on the green at noon today. Gable is going to publicly address the neighborhood beautification enforcement. We're going. Aurora crossed her arms, a defensive wall going up. I don't need you fighting my battles, Jaxon. People will talk. I'm already the neighborhood mess. I'm not fighting your battle, I said mildly. I'm a licensed contractor living in a neighborhood where the HOA president is misrepresenting municipal building codes. That offends me professionally. She let out a short, surprised breath, the tension in her shoulders dropping a fraction. It was a micro joy, a tiny victory in the middle of the stress. At noon, the community green was dotted with folding chairs. Mrs. Gable, a woman who wore her authority like a heavy winter coat, was standing at a portable podium. Aurora stood beside me at the back of the crowd, her posture rigid. When Gable opened the floor to discuss the recent easement citations, several neighbors shifted uncomfortably, looking in Aurora's direction. Gable cleared her throat. We simply must maintain property values. The retaining wall at Lot 42 is an eyesore and a liability. I stepped forward. I didn't raise my hand. I didn't raise my voice. I just spoke with the flat, carrying resonance of a man used to being heard over power tools. The wall at Lot 42 is 28 inches high, constructed of interlocking block. Gable frowned, adjusting her glasses. Mr. Hart, this doesn't concern you. It concerns my property values if the board doesn't understand basic engineering, I replied, walking slowly toward the front. You cited a violation of the 4-foot structural retention code. Since her wall is under 30 inches, it doesn't require a permit, nor does it fall under the structural setback mandate. Furthermore, the easement measurement you used is legally void. The crowd went completely silent. Gable's face flushed. We measured from the concrete. The concrete was poured in 1998, 2 feet off the actual property line, I stated, pulling a rolled blueprint tube from my jacket. I unrolled it on the folding table next to her podium. This is the original 1992 municipal survey filed with the county clerk. The iron pin is exactly 36 inches from her wall. She is entirely within her legal bounds. If you fine her, she has grounds for a harassment suit based on fraudulent code enforcement. I placed a finger on the blue ink of the survey map. I didn't look at Gable. I looked at the crowd. The facts were measurable. The reality was documented. Gable stared at the paper. She opened her mouth, closed it, and then snatched her clipboard. The board will review the documentation. Meeting adjourned. I rolled the survey back up. When I turned around, Aurora was looking at me. Her eyes wide, the twisting of her silver ring completely stopped. I walked back to her, offering the tube. Keep this in your desk. You had that just sitting around? She asked, her voice quiet. I pulled it from the county database this morning, I said truthfully. Took 10 minutes. Over the next 2 weeks, the dynamic between us shifted into a quiet, functional rhythm. The HOA backed off the retaining wall, but Gable was a bureaucrat who hated losing. She began sending Aurora minor, petty notices. A trash can left out an hour too late, a weed in the flower bed. It was a war of attrition. I started spending my evenings on my front porch, working on hand-carving a set of dining chair legs. It kept me outside. It kept me visible. It was a deterrent. One Tuesday evening, the temperature dropped sharply. I was sitting on my steps, using a spoke shave to round out a piece of walnut. The wood curled off the blade in perfect, satisfying ribbons. Aurora came out of her house carrying a toolbox that looked like it hadn't been opened since the 90s. She walked over to the wooden fence separating our yards. The middle panel was sagging, the nails rusted through. She pulled out a hammer and a handful of mismatched screws. "What's the plan there?" I asked, not looking up from my work. "Gable sent a notice," Aurora said, her voice tight with frustration. "Said the fence is an eyesore. Technically, it's on my property. I have to fix it or get fined." She lined up a screw and hit it with the hammer. I winced internally at the sound of metal on metal tearing the wood fibers. I set my tools down, wiped the sawdust from my jeans, and walked over. I stopped on my side of the fence, keeping a solid 2 feet of distance between us. "You can't hammer a wood screw, Aurora. You'll split the picket." "I don't have a drill," she muttered, wiping a strand of red hair out of her eyes. She looked exhausted. The kind of bone-deep tired that comes from constantly waiting for the next hit. "I have a drill." I turned to go to my shop. "No." Her voice was sharp. I stopped. She was gripping the hammer tightly. "I can't keep letting you fix everything, Jaxon. I'm not a charity case. I have to do this myself. If I don't, Gable will just find something else and I'll always owe someone." Her trust issues were a thick, thorny briar. She equated help with debt. "I'm not doing it for you," I said flatly. "I'm doing it because looking at a split picket every morning will ruin my coffee." I walked to my shop, retrieved an 18-volt impact driver and a box of exterior decking screws. I walked back, set them on the top rail of the fence, and stepped back. "The bit is a T25 star drive. It won't strip. Hold the picket flush against the rail, apply pressure to the back of the drill, and pull the trigger slowly." I didn't take the hammer from her. I didn't do it for her. I taught her the method. She looked at the drill, then at me. She picked it up. It was heavy in her hand. She lined up the screw. I stood nearby, my hands deep in my pockets, forcing myself not to reach out and guide her hands. The restraint was a physical ache in my shoulders, but I maintained the distance. The drill whined, the screw biting cleanly into the cedar. The board pulled tight against the rail. Aurora let out a long breath, a genuine smile breaking across her face. It transformed her entirely, erasing the fatigue. "It went in." "Physics usually works," I said, a dry attempt at a joke. She laughed, the sound cutting through the cold evening air. We spent the next hour working in tandem. She drove the screws, I held the boards level from my side. The rhythm of the work was a quiet room, blocking out the noise of the neighborhood. Every time she successfully secured a board, The tension in my chest loosened. By the time the sun fully set, the fence was solid. She handed the drill back over the top rail. Our fingers brushed against the hard plastic grip. The touch was brief, grounding. Her hands were cold. I took the drill, suppressing the urge to offer her my work jacket. "Thank you," she said softly. "You did the work," I replied. "I just provided the leverage." The peace lasted exactly 5 days. Friday afternoon, a heavy rainstorm rolled in, turning the sky the color of bruised iron. I was in my shop organizing clamps when I heard a frantic knocking at my side door. I opened it to find Aurora soaked to the bone, holding a certified mail envelope. "They served me," she said, her voice shaking. I ushered her inside the shop, the smell of sawdust and machine oil surrounding us. I pulled a clean, dry towel off a hook and handed it to her. She wrapped it around her shoulders, shivering. I took the envelope. It wasn't from the HOA. It was from a law firm representing the HOA. It was a formal notice of intent to file a lien. "Gable claims the retaining wall survey I provided is outdated," Aurora said, her teeth chattering. "She hired a private surveyor. They claim my wall is encroaching on the city water main easement. They're demanding immediate demolition or they place a $5,000 lien on my title by Monday." It was a midpoint twist I should have seen coming. Gable wasn't fighting fair. She was weaponizing the legal system's speed against a civilian who didn't know the rules. "Can they do that?" she asked, her voice cracking. "I don't have $5,000. If they put a lien on the house, my mortgage company will flag my account. I'll lose the loan." The reality of the threat hung in the damp air of the shop. This wasn't a fine. This was a structural attack on her life. I looked at the legal notice. The surveyor's stamp at the bottom was from a firm I knew, a firm known for cutting corners to appease HOA boards. "They're bluffing," I said, my voice hard. "It's a certified legal threat, Jaxon," she cried, the fear finally breaking through. She covered her face with her hands, a small, suppressed sob escaping. "I can't fight a law firm. I can't do this. I should just let them tear it down." She was drowning. I stepped forward, closing the safe distance I usually kept. I didn't wrap my arms around her. I didn't offer empty comfort. I reached out and gripped her wrists, gently pulling her hands away from her face. "Look at me." She looked up, her eyes red, raindrops tracking down her cheeks. "They are banking on you panicking," I said, my voice low, dropping an anchor into the storm of her anxiety. "The law firm doesn't know the site. They only know what Gable told them. A private surveyor cannot override a municipal PIN without a civil court order, which takes 6 months, not 3 days. But Monday—" "By Monday," I interrupted, my grip on her wrists firm, transferring the steady rhythm of my own pulse to her shaking hands. "We will have the city inspector out here. I know him. If the city signs off that there is no water main encroachment, the HOA's legal threat is considered extortion." The sudden stillness settled over her. The panic stopped spiraling. She took a deep, shaky breath, the air filling her lungs properly for the first time in 10 minutes. "You know the city inspector?" she whispered. "I build houses, Aurora. I know everybody who issues a permit." I let go of her wrists slowly, ensuring she was steady on her own feet. "Go home. Get in a hot shower. I'm making some phone calls." Saturday morning the rain had stopped, but the neighborhood was soggy and gray. At 8 a.m. sharp, a white city truck pulled up to the curb. Marcus, the district code enforcement officer, stepped out, carrying a digital transit level and a tablet. I met him at the curb, holding a thermos of coffee. I handed him a cup. "You owe me for a Saturday call-out, Hart," Marcus grumbled, taking a sip. "I'll frame your new deck for cost," I replied smoothly. "Take a look at the wall." Mrs. Gable emerged from her house 3 doors down, power-walking toward us in a tracksuit, an umbrella clutched like a weapon. "What is the meaning of this? This is a private community matter. Marcus didn't look at her. He set up the transit level on the sidewalk, calibrating the laser to the municipal grid coordinates stored in his tablet. It took him exactly 4 minutes of silent, absolute precision. Aurora stepped out onto her porch, wrapping her cardigan tight against the morning chill. She didn't come down to the sidewalk. She stood her ground on her own property. Marcus tapped his screen. The water main easement begins precisely 42 inches from the curb line. The retaining wall is at 46 inches. There is 0 encroachment. Our private surveyor found a discrepancy, Gable protested, her voice shrill. Your private surveyor didn't tie into the municipal benchmark grid, Marcus said dryly, printing a small receipt-like document from his belt printer. He walked past Gable and handed the paper directly to Aurora on her porch. This is an official city right-of-way clearance. It overrides any private assessment. You're fully compliant, ma'am. Thank you, Aurora said, taking the paper. Her voice was steady, loud enough for Gable to hear. Marcus packed up his gear and drove off. Gable stood on the sidewalk, her leverage completely neutralized by measurable reality. She glared at me. This isn't over, Mr. Hart. Actually, it is, I said, stepping onto the edge of Aurora's property. I pulled my phone from my pocket. I sent a copy of that clearance to your law firm 10 minutes ago, along with a draft of a harassment complaint. They replied that they are dropping the file. Gable's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She turned sharply and marched back to her house. I turned to Aurora. She was holding the city clearance like it was made of gold. The relief radiating from her was palpable. She looked at me, a profound gratitude in her eyes, but also a quiet realization. I hadn't fought the battle for her. I had brought the right tools so she could stand on her own porch and win it. The aftermath of the weekend was quiet. The neighborhood seemed to exhale. On Wednesday evening, I was sitting on my porch, reviewing an invoice on my laptop. The air was warm, the sky a clear, deep indigo. I heard the familiar squeak of Aurora's front door. She walked over, bypassing the fence, and came straight up the steps of my porch. She was holding a small, heavy object wrapped in a rag. She sat down on the wooden bench opposite my chair. She didn't look nervous. She looked resolved. She unrolled the rag and set the object on the table between us. It was a vintage block plane, the iron rusted, the wooden tote cracked. My grandfather's, she said quietly. It's been sitting in a box for 10 years. I was going to throw it away because it's broken. I picked it up. It was a Stanley No. 4, early 1900s. A beautiful piece of engineering, neglected but fundamentally sound. I don't want to throw it away anymore, she said, meeting my eyes. I want to know if it can be fixed. It wasn't about the tool. It was about the choice. She was bringing something broken to me, trusting that my hands wouldn't make it worse. She was claiming the space between us, setting a new term. I ran my thumb over the rusted blade. The iron needs to be soaked in vinegar to strip the oxidation. The tote can be glued and clamped. We'd have to regrind the bevel on a wet stone at 25 degrees to establish a new edge. I laid out the technical process, the words of familiar, safe rhythm. I set the plane back on the table and looked at her. It takes time. And patience. I have time, she said softly. She stood up, but she didn't walk back to her house. She stepped around the small table and closed the distance between us. I stood up to meet her. We were inches apart on my front porch, the amber porch light casting long shadows. She reached out, her fingers lightly touching the cuff of my work shirt. The touch was a stabilizer, a grounding wire for both of us. The world stopped spinning. The noise faded out entirely. You said, she murmured, her voice steady, that if I wanted, You'd make the first move, but only when I wasn't scared. The memory of that first night at the gate hung in the air. Are you scared? I asked, my voice low, keeping my hands at my sides, giving her the final choice. No. She stepped into my space, closing the final inch. I didn't rush. I lifted my hands, my calloused fingers gently framing her jaw, feeling the steady, calm pulse at her neck. It wasn't a desperate grab, it was a destination. The kiss was absolute, a heavy, grounding certainty. It was the sealing of a contract, the end of the wandering. We stood there on the porch, the chaos of the neighborhood blocked out, replaced by a quiet, immovable safety. Later, we sat side by side on the porch bench, 2 mugs of coffee between us, watching the streetlights flicker on. No grand speeches, just the concrete reality of a shared space, a shared plan, and the quiet knowledge that the foundation we had built was load-bearing. I learned that true safety in a relationship isn't about someone fighting all your battles. It's about finding a partner who hands you the right tools and stands beside you while you win them yourself. Real love isn't chaotic or dramatic. It's the quiet, consistent discipline of showing up, respecting boundaries, and building a foundation that can actually hold weight. Please like and subscribe so we can share more stories like this.